So I know technically we're supposed to have Bible study today, but the reality is that two things. One, I wanted to be able to talk about Pascha and Bright Week before Pascha and Bright Week, and I'll be in um, Prescott, Arizona next Wednesday, so now's our chance. But also, realistically, we probably need to have a conversation about what Bible study is going to look like going forward. I have a couple of ideas, and maybe right after the class we can have a little chat, not on the camera, about some thoughts about what we might want to do with Bible study going forward. And then anyway, I wasn't ready to just sort of jump in right before Pascha and start a whole new kind of class. So we're going to do this for a little bit, and then we'll resume with Bible study in a couple of weeks. So we are marching towards Holy Week now. We are in the last little stretch. By the way, because today is the second to last pre-sanctified liturgy at our parish before Pascha, right? We're down to only one more. Um, Finally felt like Father and I were in rhythm tonight, because that's how it goes. If you're interested, Friday morning there is pre-sanctified liturgy in Pleasanton at St. Innocent at 7:30 a.m. I'm going to try and go over there for that. But we left off last time. We were talking about Holy Saturday, and we stopped at the Vespero Basal Liturgy, and now we'll move forward with the calendar. We're only going to cover Bright Week today, and we'll go from there. So obviously, Great and Holy Pascha is the greatest and holiest day of the year. We call it the Feast of Feasts. If you remember, right, we talked about the fact that there are 12 great feasts. Remember, Pascha is not one of them. It's outside of even that. It's the Feast of Feasts. It is the greatest feast. It is, right, the day of the Lord, right? And so in the early church, the date of Pascha was often calculated in a variety of ways. So some of them would hold it on the Sunday after the Jewish Passover, which was the vernal new moon, right after the vernal new moon. But the problem is that Passover is calculated on a lunar calendar. And what happens is that the local priests would be able, lunar calendars don't add up to 365 point whatever days, right? And so what they would do is they had sort of this way where you could add sort of extra weeks in between to sort of get you to the vernal new moon. But that was done a little bit differently in different areas. I think we've sort of talked in Bible study. I know Father Stephen DeYoung talks a lot about the fact that there were Judaisms at the time. There was not Judaism as a monolith at the time of Christ. There wasn't like a pope of the Jews, right? And so each area kind of did things a little bit differently. When the Christians tried to base Pascha off of the Jewish Pascha, right, it meant that Christians all over the world or all over the known world at that time were celebrating Pascha at different times, right? And it was creating disunity and confusion. And then there were others who were actually holding it specifically on the Jewish Passover itself. Just said, well, we'll do it there. But even I'm not going to get into this now, but right, the Synoptic Gospels and St. John's Gospel calculate the days of Passover a little bit differently, right? In terms of what's going on there for theological reasons. So even then, like, which day of the Passover do you then celebrate the Christian Pascha if you're going to do it that way? It was just sort of confusing, right? So finally, at the First Ecumenical Council, it was decided that Pascha would be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon, on or after the vernal equinox. Okay. Now, it's actually not entirely correct to say that this was based solely on the Julian calendar. Okay. How they determined the vernal equinox at that time was they kicked it, and I think we've talked a little bit about this before, they kicked it to the astronomers in Alexandria. They were the premier astronomers in the Roman world. And they were the ones who were told, you use the best science you've got, figure out when the vernal equinox will be, and tell us when to celebrate Pascha, right? And then they did that on the basis of Egyptian astronomical calculations, not the Julian calendar. And then they would translate those into what is the Julian calendar date then for when the vernal equinox would fall, and share that with everybody because most people weren't on the Egyptian calendar. Does that make some sense as to what's going on there? We've talked before about that's why still to this day the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Alexandria has the title Judge of the Ecumeni and wears an extra petrachili on the outside of his sakos to designate the fact that they were the ones, Alexandria was the one that determined when Pascha would be. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to really emphasize is this last line. The date is not dependent on the Jewish calendar. So you hear people say, well, yeah, you can't have Pascha until after Passover. That's why the Orthodox have it at a different time than the Catholics, right? That has nothing to do with why the calendars are different. Nowhere in the First Ecumenical Council does it say you can't celebrate Pascha until after the Jewish Passover. In fact, if anything, that's exactly what the First Ecumenical Council was being called to do, was to create the calculation for the celebration of Pascha not dependent on the Jewish Passover, right? Now, it just so happens that doing it this way, it would have, generally under the Julian calendar, have always ended up after Passover. But that's not why they're calculating it that way. There's nothing in the calculation that's dependent on that. Does that make sense? So, from now on, I don't want to hear anyone here saying, right, the reason that the Orthodox have a different date for Pascha is that we can't have it until after Passover. Okay, not true. Not true. It just so happens that that is usually the case, but that's not the reason for it. So, it's a little bit longer, but forgive me, and I put a citation up there for this too. The formula for calculating the date of Pascha does use, especially today, the more inaccurate Julian calendar, which is currently 13 days behind the Gregorian calendar. We talked about this several classes ago. So right now, the Julian calendar vernal equinox date is set at March 21st, right? Which on the Gregorian calendar actually is April 3rd. This is in part because the astronomers aren't in Alexandria anymore. They're not using the more precise things. So at some point, right, the Christians in Alexandria, right, the library burns and all these other things, and so they just fixed the date at March 21st, right? And then it starts to get even more inaccurate. And it's actually a calculated approximation of the vernal full moon based on a 19-year lunar cycle that we still kind of implement. The actual astronomical vernal equinox actually occurs about 13 to 15 days earlier than that Julian calendar date, right? So on the Gregorian calendar, right, that's March 19th through 21st. So this fixed calendar date is a real problem, right? The vernal equinox used by the Orthodox Church for its calculation of Pascha is not the actual astronomical vernal equinox, nor is it the vernal full moon, which Pascha must follow according to Nicaea, the actual astronomical vernal full moon. So the point I'm making here is, if anybody tells you the First Ecumenical Council required us to use the Julian calendar, it's not there. And that's not actually what the early church did until the fall of Alexandria as a major center of learning in the ancient world, right? So the problem is we've gotten fixated on the Julian calendar now, and the result is that it keeps getting a little bit later and a little bit later, right? Every 100 or so years, you end up adding basically a day to the distance between the two dates, until eventually you're going to get to a place where we're celebrating Pascha in June or July, right? It keeps sliding later and later in the year, right? And so at some point, we're going to have to readjust the calendar to fit the science, which is what they did in the early church. Right? It's basically a function of the fact that in most of the Orthodox world, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we didn't have a lot of scientists that were free to do whatever they needed to do. We get locked in. Then the Pope comes up, the Catholics come up with their new calendar, and we say, we're not doing what a Pope tells us to do. You remember that quote from St. Paisios, right, who said, well, you can either choose the calendar from the Pope or the calendar from a pagan idolater. Which one do you want? Right? I mean, it's not like not like Julius Caesar was any particularly holy person. He was certainly not any more holy than a Pope, right? So anyway, I've beaten that dead horse enough, but it's important to understand that there's some urban legends out there about the calculation of the date of Pascha that we need to watch for. Yeah.
How did it come about that it was fixed on the 21st? Did that happen in local councils?
I don't know exactly, and it probably wasn't even local. I mean, maybe like just a local synod sort of. Remember there was a point where Patriarch of Alexandria wasn't even living in Alexandria anymore. He was in Constantinople for extended periods of time. I don't know exactly. It was probably my guess is that it was the what do they call it? Endum Demusa, basically the local sitting synod of Constantinople probably decided it at some point. But I don't know for sure. Okay, so the service, the actual resurrectional service, right? We have the midnight service, usually starting around 11 or 11:30 p.m. It's sometimes called the rush service because it's short, right? I think that comes more out of the Slavic practice of calling it that, but it's actually a fairly appropriate name. It's actually supposed to be a short service, and I think realistically, setting it at 11:30 makes sense. You'll notice what we do in our parish: we put it at 11. Poor Petros and the other chanters end up repeating the hymns multiple times until eventually we get to 11:45, so that we can read the patriarchal encyclical. That actually came out of the old days when we would always pass a tray then, because that's when the most people were there in the church, right? Um, Unfortunately, it's the tail wagging the dog. It's supposed to be a quick service, get in and get out. Because what is that service? So first of all, if you have that Black Holy Week book that we all use at this parish, it calls this service the Orthros of the Resurrection, or the Orthros of Pascha. False. Completely false, right? It's Mesoniktikon, as we talked about. It's the midnight service. On Sundays, the midnight service consists of the Trisagion prayers, Psalm 50, normally a canon to the Holy Trinity, an apolytikion, a litany, and dismissal. So, what does this service at 11 or 11:30 look like on Pascha? The Trisagion prayers, Psalm 50, the canon of Holy Saturday, right? One more time. All right, it's the same canon that we sang at the Lamentations service, right? We repeat that. The Trisagion prayers again, and a Apolytikion, concluding litany and dismissal. It's the midnight service, right? It's the midnight prayers. Is there any Orthros in the world, ever in the Orthodox world, that looks like that? No, right? It's not Orthros. I don't know why that persists in that book. It drives me nuts. It's not Orthros, right? Because then otherwise, what are we doing after that? No. We go outside. Christos Anesti, right? And Anastasios Imera, right? And all these other hymns, right? What is that? That's Orthros. That's Orthros. Of course it is. Yeah. Come back for St. George this year on Wednesday, or come back for Zodokus Bigi, the life-giving spring, on Friday, and you'll see the same order for Orthros. It's the Bright Week order of Orthros. Okay. So anyway, if ever this gets back to the editors of the Papadeus Holy Week book, stop it. Anyway, to the point where I've even had priests comment to me, yeah, I start the Orthros at 11:30. So did you get blessing from their bishop? Anyway. because it's short. It's quick. Psalm 50 canon, half an hour, you're in and out. Right.
So I guess because orthos is what makes it longer.
No, Orthros is another service. There's 3 services on Pascha.
I just remember
Right.
from
Yes, I know, they all run together. This is the part at the beginning where it's still dark. It's still dark in the church. We're inside before we get the light and before we go outside. Just that little section around 11 or 11:30 is the rush service, right? And I mean, like literally, we could be done in half an hour if I'm not criticizing the way it's developed here. I'm just saying that it's realistically, it's a half-hour service, get in and get out. So then we have the resurrection service itself. And the first thing that happens, this isn't part of the official order of the service, but it's done in a lot of places that's incredibly beautiful. So it's the, which Eothinon is it? 7? It's in Varis, but I forget which Eothinon Doxastikon it is. It's one of the Sunday, it must be 7, right? I mean, it's in Varis. Anyway, it's one of the, so on Sundays, there is a hymn at the praises during Orthros that matches the resurrectional gospel reading that we did at Orthros. And in the grave mode or 7th mode, right, this is that doxastikon. And it's so beautiful. So what ends up happening is you'll hear the chanters, they go into the altar with the curtain closed, all the lights are out, and we sing a hymn. Idui Scotia, right? Behold darkness and early morning. O Mary, why are you standing outside at the tomb with so much darkness enshrouding your thoughts, that you seek where Jesus was laid? Look at how the disciples who ran together deduced from the linen cloths and the napkin that he has risen. And then they remembered the scriptures concerning this. Through them we too have believed, and with them we extol you, Christ, the giver of life. It's this beautiful resurrectional hymn of sort of standing in awe, beholding the resurrection. Behold the darkness, right? It's still dawn. So we'll sing this, and then at that point, the priest will light the Paschal candle and come through. This is this piece of the service is actually an imitation of the holy fire in Jerusalem. That's where it derives from, is that practice. I do know priests who actually will pray in the altar. Father Photios used to do this. He would pray the prayer after this hymn, pray the same prayer that the Patriarch of Jerusalem prays before the holy fire comes. And I know priests who have had it happen that their candle lit spontaneously in that moment. A little miracle of the holy fire. It's happened here before. Yeah.
I have a question. Why Jerusalem they have the Christos Anesti like at 4 o'clock, whatever time? I don't know. So,
Well, they're not doing Christos Anesti, they're doing the holy fire.
the holy fire.
It's a little
Is it done
different.
the same thing, the resurrection?
No, it's a separate, unique service. Yeah. Because it's in the Holy Sepulchre. And the time for that has varied over the centuries because sometimes the Turks would get involved and cause a problem. And this is the point, right, is that no matter how much the Turks messed with it, it always happened when the Patriarch was there, right? In fact, there's the 1 year where I think it was the Armenians, convinced the Turks to lock the Orthodox Patriarch out of the Holy Sepulchre. And so he went out on the steps outside, knelt down and prayed, and the fire came there. The Armenians stayed in the tomb the whole time and got nothing. Right? I don't know. I'm reminded of the gospel reading of Lazarus and the rich man. Right? Send me back. And he says they have the law and they have Moses and the prophets. If they won't believe them, then they won't even believe one rising from the dead.
It's not the resurrection there with the light. Yeah?
No, it's a separate service. Yeah, a separate service. Then they come back at midnight or whatever and do the proper service. So the priest comes out holding the light, singing, right? Come receive the light from the never setting light. and glorify Christ who has risen from the dead. And this is sung, right, and repeated as the light is passed then between all of the people. And then there's the procession outside. Ideally, it would be a procession around the church 3 times. Okay? Pray that we can build our church so that we can actually walk around it someday. Properly, it would be a threefold walking around the church, during which the bells should be rung very slowly. Dung, dung, right? And we sing, angels in the heavens extol your resurrection, O Christ our Savior. Count us worthy who are here on earth to glorify you with a pure heart. The angels are extolling the resurrection before we do because they behold it before we do, right? The angels saw the resurrection before the humans did. So before we begin to extol the resurrection, the angels do. This is actually, it's from the Saturday evening resurrectional Vespers and Plagal Second, in the 6th mode. This is the first hymn of the Apostica. The point of this that I'm making is if you come to Orthros and Vespers, you actually hear these hymns throughout the year, right? Not just on Pascha. We do it a little differently. We sing them in a different way on Pascha, but it's the same hymns. Then once we're outside, right, we do something unique, which is that we read the gospel. Yes?
Is there a vesper service?
It's the Vesper St. Basil's liturgy Saturday morning. Yeah. There's it's Vespers and liturgy together. Mm-hmm. Yep. Which is why, actually, so we'll talk in a minute, the hymns there are the regular, some of the hymns at least, are the regular Saturday evening hymns in the first mode. And we'll talk in a minute about why that is. So we go outside and we read the gospel of the resurrection. The gospel is proclaimed first as sort of we're not in the midnight service and we're not in Orthros yet. It's sort of separate, right? But it could be considered effectively the Orthros gospel. Notice it's the gospel of the resurrection. 2 things to notice about this. Eothinon, or Sunday resurrectional gospel 2. Why not 1? Why not 1? Yeah. Because we already read it on Holy Saturday morning. It's the final part of the Holy Saturday Vesperal Basil Liturgy Gospel. The last half of that is Eothinon 1, right? So we already read that on Pascha, and now we're reading the second, right? Exactly. Oh, I have it written up there, so that's why. I should probably read my own notes. But at least you were reading, yeah.
These are not one of the Euthanada that we do, 11 Euthanada.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's number 2. Yeah. Yep. It's exactly the second one. Which is why in the gospel book, that one is always covered in wax. In most churches, that one is covered in wax because Father's got his candle going. Mm-hmm.
Are for evidences that Christ had been resurrected.
Right.
Had been resurrected.
Yes, and well, yeah, because no gospel actually says anything about the resurrection. The resurrection itself, the event of the resurrection is covered over in silence. Right? It's covered over in silence. We only see the resurrection when the women come and the angels roll the stone away and he's not there, right? Yeah. So then after the gospel, the priest begins, glory to the holy consubstantial life creating an undivided Trinity, always now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen. That's actually the beginning of Orthros. And then he begins singing Christos Anesti, right? Christ is risen. And it's interspersed with these verses from the Psalms. Technically, there are 10 repetitions of Christ is risen at this time, right? Whenever we do the verses, we sing it 3 times first, then we intersperse it with the verses, and then we sing it again at the end. Okay, it's 10 repetitions. You'll hear chanters sometimes ask, a priest sort of shorthand before service. Are we doing the 10? Right? That's what it means, rather than just singing it 3 times. So we do the verses here with, I defy anyone to get through these without choking up, right? Especially on that first day. Then we go into there's the Litany of Peace, and Orthros continues in a shorter form. We go straight into the Paschal canon, right? Often in parishes it gets reduced to just the Catavasias, but really it would be the whole canon, which is so incredible. And I would encourage you, if you've never read the Paschal canon, the whole proper canon, it takes maybe 15 minutes to read tops. Right? Make it a point. Read it a few times during Bright Week. Read it a few times during Bright Week. Pray that, and really allow all of that to sink in. After the Paschal canon, right? Even the Odin, yeah. It'll be in ages. A lot of prayer books have this. Prayer book, for example, has it. Jordanville's prayer book has it. You can find it in a few places. It's not in the Black Book, unfortunately. But yeah, Ages has it for sure. And if you just type in Orthodox Paschal Canon, it'll come up. It's pretty easy to find. Right, Ninth Ode gets replaced. Instead of More Honorable Than the Cherubim, right, we sing Shine, Shine, O New Jerusalem, or I think now they say Be Illumined, whichever way you want to do it. Or what is, I don't know, Dee Dee's always plays with it. I think the most recent one, it was like Be Illumined, Shine, or something. I don't know, there's some mixture. Anyway. Fotizu. just pick something and stick with it. Anyway. It's a pretty typical Orthros structure, but streamlined, right? Then goes into the Expostularion and the praises. The praises are, again, basically the first mode, resurrectional hymns that you get every first mode Sunday, followed by then the Paschal stichera. And that basically concludes Orthros, and you go right into the liturgy. So one of the most common resurrectional, this is testing a little bit of your liturgical muscles tonight. One of the most common features of a Sunday resurrectional Orthros is the Avlogitaria, right? Why don't we have them as a part of the Paschal Orthros? If they're a feature of the resurrectional Sunday Orthros, why don't we have them on Pascha? Yeah. No, they're a resurrectional hymn. Yeah. Why do you seek? Yeah, but that could be true of any Sunday Orthros in some ways. Because we pick them up again like a few weeks from now, right? Third Sunday of Pascha. Still Pascha, we're still singing Paschal hymns, and now we're doing the Avlogitaria. Mhm. Right? Right. Right. Well, so no, what happens is on a feast, the feast takes priority then. If it's a feast of Christ, it'll take priority over the resurrection even, like Christmas or something, right? So the Avlogitaria get left out. So remember what the Avlogitaria are. They're hymns that are added to the end of Psalm 118 for the departed on Saturdays or for the resurrection on Sundays, right? At the Paschal Orthros, we're not reading the Psalms. We're not reading Psalm 118, so there's no place for the Avlogitaria to go. Now, what happens is in common practice, right, we leave the Psalm out and we just do the Avlogitaria. But on Pascha, we're not doing Psalms, and so there's no place for the Avlogitaria to go. Does that make some sense now? Right? It's what I was asking that just as a reminder, right? The Avlogitaria are really a follow-on at the end of Psalm 118. We forget that because we often don't do the psalm in parish practice. Okay. All right. Then we go into the Paschal liturgy itself. The main difference is that the liturgy begins with the Paschal verses and the 10-time repetition of Christ is risen. Okay. Unfortunately, in some parishes, including ours, if I'm remembering right, what ends up happening is we end up just doing 3 Christ is risen at the beginning of liturgy. That's actually for after Bright Week. During Bright Week, it should always be the 10 with the verses. The priest is sensing around the altar as he does it at each of the 4. Kind of like tonight, let my prayer arise. He senses around the altar, but it's Christ is risen at each side. Okay. And then, some other basic festal features like the as many as have been baptized into Christ. Christos Anesti replaces a bunch of the other hymns during the liturgy. And then either at the end of Orthros, which is actually where it's supposed to be, or at the end of liturgy more commonly, we'll do the Paschal homily of St. John Chrysostom. Okay, and we read that. It's actually the only one in common practice that has remained. There are actually patristic homilies appointed for many other feasts in the liturgical practice that are still read in various monasteries and other places. But in parish practice, most of those have fallen out of use. But this one still remains because it's just the best. Any other questions about the Paschal service itself? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That would come after the gospel, before going in, right? So you would do that and then start the Paschal canon. That's a late, so that service, that part of the service, actually comes from the service of the consecration of a new church, right? It's not appointed for Pascha. It's appointed for the consecration of a church. And if you're going to do it, remember, that's about the harrowing of hell, right? It's really more appropriate Saturday. In some places, you will see that done when they go out and process the Kavuklion around. And then before they come back into the church, the priest or the bishop will do the knocking of the doors. Then at the lamentation service. I think if you're going to do it at Holy Week or at Pascha, that's the proper place, not on Easter. The gates of hell, man, he already flew out of there, right? Like that's not, we're done with that, right? But it does, people like it, right? It's dramatic, it's fun, it's totally out of place on Pascha. It really is. Yeah.
Is it true that the communion on Pascha Day is the most important one? I don't know, because a lot of times I grew up and they told me to take communion that day or I don't know if it is.
Christ is Christ. And it's the same Christ, yesterday, today, and forever. The Christ we receive in the chalice is the same at every liturgy. Right? Tonight was Pascha for those of us who received communion. We receive the whole Christ. Now, that said, the Church is very clear that on Pascha is the day that all Orthodox Christians, barring some sort of canona, should be receiving communion. Right? Even many Christians who are under a penance will be given the blessing on Pascha you receive. And for an Orthodox Christian not to receive on Pascha, remember, what's the definition of excommunication? Not communing,
Not communion.
not receiving communion. You are quite literally excommunicating yourself by not receiving on Pascha. And absent a good reason for that, I don't know how you stand before Christ and justify that. Right?
The same, because a lot of people I know in prison, they go and have their Christos
I
Anesti
know,
midnight,
they
and
go
then
home.
they go home.
They're excommunicated by choice. It's pretty sad, right?
It is sad. And it's also so beautiful, the little after Pascha.
Of course.
So amazing that it's that. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I know a lot of people
I know. And we should weep for them. There are people who needed a heart transplant. And the hospital called and said, "We've got the new organ for you. Come." And they walked to the hospital, saw the operating room, and went home. How can you not just weep for somebody like that? Pity them. Um, so, one other service. So, properly speaking, there's a service appointed between Orthros and liturgy, which are the Paschal hours. Okay? If you go to the monastery, you go to a Russian church, they'll usually do this. And right, the Paschal hours is a short service that replaces during Bright Week morning prayers, evening prayers, the hours, first, third, sixth, ninth. It replaces Compline, it replaces the midnight office, it replaces Thanksgiving for communion, all of them, through Bright Week. And it's basically just a collection of certain hymns from the Paschal services. Okay. For Compline, there's an additional prayer to St. Basil that's added. It's very quick, beautiful. In the Russian tradition, they sing all of it. You don't read it, you just sing all of the hymns. In Greek tradition, we read them usually. But nevertheless, you can find this. A lot of prayer books have the Paschal hours. You can find it online very easily. You can find recordings of it on YouTube. Make use of it. It's a joy. And I mean, you've been through all of Lent. You've been praying all these long prayers. You're exhausted. The idea that you get to wake up, prayers are quick, they're joyful, they're happy, they're fast, and I can go have my coffee and my bacon. It's great, right? Make use of it. It's awesome. Right? Rajai, for example, when I'm consuming the gifts in the altar after liturgy, he usually reads the prayers of thanksgiving for communion for me. But Pascha and Bright Week, he's reading this instead. Right? It's a real joy. Yeah.
Is this done multiple times a day?
Yeah.
At those appointed hours?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just in the morning?
In the morning, at night, middle of the day,
And
after
do them
communion.
in church?
No, they're not usually at church, but you just as your personal prayers. You know, it replaces pretty much all your personal prayers at home. What's that? Yeah, or in the monasteries, or yeah. Uh, Generally, in the monastic practice, what they do is they read it 3 times for each hour. Um, but not everybody does that. Just once is sufficient, unless you're told otherwise. But it's beautiful, and in fact, like you'll see, we'll get to this right on the leave taking of Pascha. Right, we repeat all of the services of Pascha, our parish feast day. Right, and the next day when we go to Oakland for the Feast of Ascension, the Vespers of Ascension, before we start Vespers, His Eminence will always have us go out in the narthex. We do the Paschal hours 3 times as a way to finally close out Pascha. And then we process into the church and we begin the Feast of Ascension. Right? Usually, Father has everything white and Paschal. And then we finish the Paschal hours, we process in, we blow out the Paschal candle, and switch everything to gold, and then begin the Feast of Ascension. Right? Yeah. Mm. It should be in the Pentecostarion. The Pentecostarion. Yeah, it's usually in there. If you have the full text, not the musical one, it's in the Pentecostarion, for sure. That's where it originally comes from. But most Orthodox prayer books in every language has them, and they are on ages as well. All right. So then that next day, we come back for the Agape Vespers, the Vespers of Love. Again, right, the Vespers there, the Paschal verses replace Psalm 103. We do the 10, and then straight into the Litany of Peace. No Psalm 103 like we normally do at Vespers, like we did tonight. Lord, I Have Cried now has the second mode, resurrectional hymns. So remember I said Holy Saturday for Vespers, we did first mode. Now on Pascha, we're doing second mode. Guess what we're going to do Monday at Vespers? Third mode. And then Tuesday is fourth mode. Wednesday is fifth mode, Plagal first, right? Thursday is Plagal, wait, I'm getting confused. I skipped one in there, right? Monday is third, Tuesday is fourth. Yeah, Wednesday is Plagal first. Thursday is Plagal second. Friday is Plagal fourth. No, I'm missing somebody. I'm sorry. No, we skip grave mode. There's no Plagal third, but grave mode or seventh mode we skip. Right. Good night. Wait, Sunday. No, Sunday is one. That's why. So, I'm sorry. Sunday is one. Monday is two. That's why I'm getting confused. Vespers on Monday is third, but that's Tuesday, right? So then Tuesday is three. Wednesday four. Thursday Plagal first. Friday Plagal second. And then Saturday is Plagal fourth. We skip grave mode. And the main reason for that, frankly, is just quite literally, how does it get, why does the seventh mode or whatever have that title, varis or grave? It means like heavy, right? Why does it have that title? It's because it has the lowest base note of any of the modes, right? Basically. And so it's a little less joyful, although I think I think grave mode is actually really joyful. It's very pretty, and harmonic usually anyway. But the next Sunday, Thomas Sunday, what mode is the Apolytikion in? Grave mode. You pick up grave mode then on the following Sunday, right? Anyway, there's the great prokimenon at the Vespers. Who is so great a God as our God? You are the God who works wonders. Then there's the gospel reading of Christ appearing to the 10, right? Judas has killed himself and Thomas is gone, right? So it's Christ appearing to the 10. And it's read in as many languages as possible to represent the message of the gospel going out to the entire world. Do you read Coptic? You need to offer to Father to read that gospel in Coptic, please. Thank you. Anyway, sorry, I'm not telling you what to do, but I'd love to hear it. And then it concludes with the Paschal Stichera at the end of the Apostica, like we did with the praises in Orthros that morning. Makes some sense, right? It's again sort of truncating some pieces of it, and it gets this very resurrectional flavor. That pattern from the Orthros of Pascha and the Vespers of the Agape Vespers becomes the pattern for all of the services during Bright Week. So the Orthros and Vespers match. The Orthros matches Sunday morning Paschal Orthros, and the Vespers all match Agape Vespers in the structure, just no gospel the other days. And we're going through all of the resurrectional tones as if every day is Sunday. Right? Every day is the resurrection, every day is Sunday, and we continue on. We say Bright Week most commonly. It's really more Renewal Week is the more appropriate term, right? In Greek, you say Renewal Week. Bright comes from more the Russian tradition. They're both perfectly fine terms.
Isn't it Holy Week?
Holy Week is Holy Week. Great and Holy Week is really the proper, right? In Greek, you usually say Great Monday, Great Tuesday. We tend to say Holy. It's really Holy and Great Monday, Holy and Great Tuesday, right? And really, it should be Holy and Great Friday. We've picked up the Latin tradition of calling it Good Friday. It's not a bad thing. It was a pretty good Friday for
I was
the
just going
world.
to ask you, Greek literally translates to renewal? Will you come in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not clean, not clean. I'm
Catholic?
talking. No, I'm talking about after Pascha.
Oh,
What is the name in Greek?
uh,
Right. And that's what I'm. Anyway, but yeah, it basically means a renewal, remaking almost. Yeah,
I gave you the
yeah, we'll find it. It's okay. And then, of course, there's no fasting at all on Bright Week. Yeah. Um, Couple of other little things. Bright Tuesday, we tend to celebrate Saints Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene. And these are newly revealed saints. So they were martyred on the island of Lesbos on Bright Tuesday in 1463, 10 years after the fall of Constantinople. The people would continue to pilgrimage there. They would go to the monastery where they were from that island, every Bright Tuesday. But over the years and the centuries, they forgot why they were going. They would all kind of go, and everybody just sort of knew, yeah, Bright Tuesday, we all go to the monastery and celebrate the services and have a picnic. Everybody forgot why. Finally, very recently, in 1959, a pious man decided to build a chapel near the ruins of the monastery. He just said, I think I'll build a chapel there. And on July 3rd of that year, workmen discovered the relics of St. Raphael while they were clearing the ground. They find the relics of this monk there. And there were various signs, myrrh and so on. Very soon, the saint, but they didn't know who it was. It was just, they could tell that this was a martyred monk, but they didn't know who. All of a sudden, Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene start appearing to various people on the island, telling them who they are. Saint Raphael was a priest monk, and Saint Nicholas was his deacon. Saint Nicholas's relics were then discovered on June 13th, 1960. And then Saint Irene was the daughter of the village mayor who was killed at the same time, and her relics were found May 12th, 1961. And so these saints started appearing, and eventually, Saint Nicholas and then Saint Irene told them where to dig to find their relics as well. So now on Bright Tuesday, that celebration has become, in recent decades, much more common throughout the rest of the church. Ascension in Oakland has a lot of people with devotion to these saints, and so they usually have liturgy that morning. Then we have on Bright Friday, right, we have the feast of the Theotokos, the life-giving spring or the life-giving fountain. In the 5th century, there was a man named Leo who was walking near a grove of trees just outside Constantinople. He came upon a blind man who was thirsty but could find no water. Leo had compassion on him, searched for water, and then a voice spoke to him, telling him that there was water nearby. He searched but could find nothing. The voice spoke again, calling him emperor, and directing him to a muddy spring in the midst of the grove of trees. He was directed to anoint the blind man's eyes with the water by which he received his sight. Leo knew it was the Mother of God who had spoken to him and guided him to this miraculous healing spring. Many years later, just as the Theotokos had foretold, Leo became the emperor. He is now also a saint. He had a church built at the site of the spring, dedicated to the Mother of God, so that faithful pilgrims could visit the spring and be healed. In time, there are countless miracles of people who have gone to this spring and prayed to the Mother of God for her help. Over time, though, it became, in fact, the second most important church, or third maybe, in all of Constantinople. It was certainly the most important church in honor of the Mother of God, the Church of Placerne. Right? It's a very famous church. You see it mentioned throughout the church year in various different things, and even just in the history books. The spring is still there. This is it today. There are even little fish that swim in it and that live in the spring. Not long after the fall of Constantinople, it was destroyed. There was a little chapel the Orthodox tried to keep there. Every now and then the Turks would knock it down and they'd rebuild it. And there was just a little chapel over the site. In 1833, the Orthodox community in Constantinople convinced the Sultan to permit rebuilding the Church of the Theotokos. And there was a glorious new church that was erected, which stood until 1955, when the Muslim Turks again desecrated and destroyed the church. There were pogroms against the Orthodox people in Turkey in Constantinople, specifically in 1955. Bishop Anthimos of blessed memory, who some of us may remember, I know Kostas heard of them, was there in Constantinople as a very young deacon at the time. And I remember him telling me he was weeping. And he remembers seeing a Turk literally Turkish soldier urinating into the life-giving spring, while the monks and the deacons were around trying to protect the spring. And still, at this point, he was in his 80s. He would just begin weeping every time he thought about it. Thankfully, the church has been restored and rebuilt, and you can visit today. And many miracles still happen from the spring. Finally, on Bright Saturday, a local feast, the feast of the Theotokos, Queen of the Angels. So this is a new celebration specifically for the Orthodox in California. It was commissioned, the icon and the service were commissioned by His Grace Bishop Maxim of the Serbian Western Diocese. You can't see the icon very well here because it's not high enough quality. If you ever get a chance, Google it though. What you'll actually see is that clustered around the middle are all of the main cathedrals of the different jurisdictions in Los Angeles. So the Serbian cathedral, the Russian cathedral, the OCA cathedral, the Greek cathedral, and the Antiochian cathedral are all depicted in this icon with the noticeable skyscrapers and everything.
That's
And
what it's called, Queen of the Angels?
yeah, and because that's the name of the city, right? The city is actually, right, Our Lady Queen of the Angels, right? Yeah, that's the formal title of Los Angeles, is Our Lady Queen of the Angels. And so, yeah, Reina de los
The
Ángeles.
city of Los
Um,
Angeles.
yeah. So Bishop Maxim says that's a pretty good, that works for us. And so he had this beautiful icon commissioned. Bishop John Ioannis, for example, has it next to his computer. I think His Eminence has it either in his office or in his house. I can't remember now. In any event, and you can, the Serbs in Los Angeles will actually sell a copy of the service if you look for it through Sebastian Press. It's some beautiful hymns, very local. I mean, this is how a lot of our feasts got in there, right? They were local feasts, and enough people liked them, and that eventually they found their way into the Maneon over time. And so we'll have our own California version of that eventually. That's the end of Bright Week. When does Bright Week end? Saturday at the Paschal hours, right before Vespers. Right? Vespers on Bright Saturday, that night, back to Psalm 103. We sing Christ is risen 3 times, but then we're back into Psalm 103 in the normal structure of the services for the most part. Any questions about Bright Week, Pascha itself? Anything? All right. All I can think about is a cheeseburger. Anyway, yeah.
I found out
Okay.
the Bright Week is called Diakonissimos.
There you go. There you go. That's it. Good. All right, let's finish. Lord of the powers, be with us, for in times of distress we have no other help but you. Lord of the powers, have mercy on us.